So today we have Ariel James. She's an assistant professor at McAllister College at Department of Psychology. And today she's going to talk about updating the author recognition test.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. It's a little formal. I wanted to say this isn't like a talk though. I will be talking, but it's not like a talk, you know what I'm saying? Like I'm like sitting down, you know? So I just wanted to talk about a project I've been working on for a while in my lab, and there's some stuff that's happened so far, but then there's also stuff that needs to happen in the future, and so I'm curious about people's thoughts. My lab and I have had fun kind of thinking about possibilities, and now this summer I need to like decide some things. Okay, so speaking of my lab, there's a cute picture. This is the current iteration of our lab, so not including students who are abroad. This is a sophomore and 2 juniors. Well, I guess now, since it's summer, this is a junior and 2 seniors. We're posing outside of a bathroom because we just happened to all be together at the same time near a bathroom, and we took that picture. So we're called the Spindle Lab. It stands for sentence processing, individual differences, literacy, and eye tracking. It covers the types of things that we like to do, and also it makes a word, and that was important to me. Okay, so there's sort of a framework that I find very influential and that guides what I do in general. And so this is this old framework in psychology called the United Discipline Framework. And so this was part of a speech / proposal by Lee Cronbach, a famous psychology / stats guy. And he was arguing that, so this is back in the 50s, that in psychology there were 2 disciplines, that there's the people who do correlational studies, like people studying intelligence and personality, and so they're like looking at individual differences as like their thing, versus the experimental people, so like rats and pigeons and stuff like that, so like manipulating things and seeing how environments affect behavior and stuff, and that ideally psychology will become a united discipline where you're able to take what you know about correlational methods and what you know about experimental methods and mix them together. And so this is a diagram that he drew of how this would work, where you're interested in some organism, like a person. You're interested in stuff about that person, like stuff you can measure about them, stuff you can maybe figure out about their experience. And then you can also figure out stuff about the present situation that might be something you manipulate. And then all of that together predicts some sort of response of interest. So for me, I take human subjects, and I'm interested in different measures of language processing. So like particularly how people read sentences is generally what I like to study. I have done a little bit of like speech perception, but that's mainly because I have a friend who knows stuff about speech perception, and then I was also there. And then stuff I'm interested in terms of past situations, and what I'm talking about today is stuff that I'm just going to vaguely call language experience. And so I measure that with a variety of things, including the author recognition test, which we'll come back to, but also just asking people stuff about their, like how much they read or other kinds of language experience they have, quizzing them on vocabulary or how to pronounce irregularly spelled words, stuff like that, to just try to figure out like how much time they're spending with words and stuff, and kind of what the quality is of that time they're spending. Some psychometric stuff I might be interested in. Generally, I'm interested in things that would be called like basic cognitive skills and how they go along with language skills. So stuff like working memory, perceptual speed, and stuff. And then I might experimentally manipulate stuff to make sentences more or less tricky. So stuff I've done before involves manipulating the predictability of sentences, or giving people weird relative clause sentences that make them slow down. And then I try to predict, with all of this stuff together, these different outcomes, like how long people spend reading, how well they answer comprehension questions, stuff like that. So that's an overview of the kind of stuff that I'm trying to do. And as you can see with all this like stuff on the periphery, it involves these different measures that I'm hoping are like good for measuring stuff about the people. I feel like I'm pretty confident. Well, this is actually another sort of area that I'm not talking about today. I was going to say I'm pretty confident about these things, these experimental things, because they're just like a ton of work using these different sentence manipulations. But the caveat is that they work really well when you're just looking at averages across experimental conditions. So you're collapsing across subjects and there's some big like relative clause effect. But there's just sort of mounting evidence, some of which I've published, is it's revealing that it's actually not necessarily true that these are going to be good measures of individuals' behavior in these experimental conditions. So if you want to say that a person has a big object subject relative clause effect, that's harder to measure accurately than just saying that there is this effect that exists across people on average. That's a whole nother tangent, and I'm not going to talk about it unless people want me to. So the short version is I'm very interested in measurement. That sort of happened as a result of being interested in language processing. Okay, so the rest of what I'm talking about is about one specific thing, and it's called the author recognition test. So hope you like talking about measurement. Sure. Yay, items. Okay, there we go. All right, people are hyped. Okay, so what is the author recognition test? So this was first developed in 1989 by Keith Stanovich and a colleague, somebody West, who, oh no, I don't remember West's first name. Oh boy. I'm sure West was also nice. I just know more about Keith Stanovich. So they wanted to figure out stuff about reading and literacy and stuff like that. And they wanted to get a measure of people's what they call print exposure, so how much they're reading like physical texts. There wasn't so much of like people reading on screens back then, so it was really just like, you know, books and magazines, newspapers, that kind of stuff. And they wanted to come up with a measure that seemed more objective, like that was more like a quiz, versus just asking people like, do you read? Because reading is kind of a smart people thing, and so they were worried that people were going to like inflate how much they read to seem smart. And so the task basically involves just giving people a long list of names and then asking people to pick out the names that they recognize as names of authors. But there's a balance of authors of books and then just some names that they found, like in a phone book or whatever. And so the idea is you want to try to separate out people's response bias. Like some people just like saying yes to things and are just trying to like click as many things as possible. Or I'm already saying click. Circle, this is on pen and paper back in the day. Versus just like actually being sensitive to like detecting the correct authors. So there's a penalty for selecting foils. And so you have to like subtract that out from their actual selection of real authors. And so it's been used for them in trying to figure out how is this related to a person's just like ability to read, how good they're recognizing words. So they came up with what they considered popular authors, 50 popular authors, both fiction and nonfiction. They presented it as a checklist. And so something I want to point out is that they specifically tried to avoid what they called curriculum authors, authors that they figured that everybody is exposed to in school. They wanted to try to zero in on authors that are kind of going to separate people from like the big readers from like the not reading so much. And so they wanted to get rid of like the stuff that everybody is doing. That was their logic. And so people did kind of bad. So well, I shouldn't say that. That's really rude. So there are 50 correct answers. Like perfect would be recognizing all 50, which is pretty wild. So like they did 2 different experiments. The means were like relatively low, but it was a pretty reliable measure. And it also correlated with a bunch of stuff that they were interested in. I'm just showing you a snapshot of some moderate correlations. I would say these are like big correlations for cognitive psychologists. So we have low standards. But so MRT is the magazine recognition test. This maybe isn't used so much anymore because people don't really read paper magazines so much. But there might be some version of like online publications that would make sense. Asking people how much they read, so just a reading survey. stuff about like spelling. So I'm highlighting in red things that just the way that they're scored, it's like backwards. But it's everything's in the way that you would expect. That like people are better at like knowing how to pronounce irregular words, knowing how to pronounce pseudo words, so just sort of like phonological skills and stuff. All this is like related to how they're doing on this arguably kind of weird task of recognizing the names of authors. They're not asking you whether you've read a book by this author. They just want to see if you recognize their name. Okay, skipping ahead because I haven't even talked about what we're doing yet. So there's been an update, sort of a comprehensive update in 2008 by Mary Ellen MacDonald, who studies sentence processing, and some of her students and colleagues. They're interested in sentence level stuff, and they figured that they should update the author recognition test for stuff that would work for undergrads that they were testing. So they did some piloting. They replaced some names that were either like everybody got them or barely anybody got them. And so they ended up with a list of 65 authors and 65 foils. And there's only a little bit of overlap from Stanovich and West. People did kind of better. Stuff correlated with other stuff. I'm just going to kind of skip over this. Okay, so then, okay, here's me now. So this was years ago when I was a first-year grad student. I was interested in language experience and literacy and how it relates to people actually understanding sentences while they're listening. And then later I was interested in reading, it doesn't matter. So I needed a battery of tasks that measured language experience. Also, I didn't know how to program anything complicated. I was using MATLAB and I didn't know what to do. So I also didn't want to score things by hand. So I didn't want to have people have a piece of paper like in the 89 version and like circling things because that was going to take me too long. So I came up with something that looked like this because this was something I knew how to program, which is I show a single name and people have to select whether it's an author or if it's just a name that they don't know. It's not author, not author, because you would have to know the person to know that they're not an author, and that would be weird. Does anybody know? Author. Mary Ellen MacDonald's aunt. Author.
I worked at a library, so.
Nice.
Yeah, it does. See a lot of names.
Some stuff that I found, it's good at predicting some sentence stuff. And so I was interested in trying to predict stuff from language experience and some other cognitive stuff, kind of like in that model I showed. People did less good than they did in Mary Ellen MacDonald's thingy. It was kind of reliable and it correlated with stuff. So I was like, okay, this is kind of good. These two are survey measures. This is asking people to compare themselves to other people in terms of how much they read. And this is asking people to estimate how much time they spend reading. This one doesn't really correlate with a lot of stuff. It seems like maybe people aren't that good at estimating stuff. Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
So you're looking at how much people read. And one of the things I'm sure you've come across is that, reading online is so much closer to oral language, to literary language. So, people may read a lot, but they may not read literary language nearly as much. And when they estimate how much they read, do they differentiate, or did you get at that somehow, or did that factor?
Not so far, I haven't. So it's a great question / point that one, reading text, whether you're reading it in a digital way or a print way, but like the kind of text that are like fiction, nonfiction books has it's like a different register than stuff you're reading online and articles and things like that. And so I am involved in a project with, so my former PhD advisor, Dwayne Watson, is at Vanderbilt. And he and a group of other colleagues were looking at trying to estimate how much people read internet stuff, like web stuff. And so asking people like what websites they spend the most time reading, and then going to those websites and scraping them, and then trying to measure different languagey things about them, like vocabulary things and like coherence things and various things that you run through a model.
Factor out social media as well.
Right. So yeah, social media, like that one gets complicated because we can't do it for things that are like Instagram, Facebook, where like what people are seeing is really contingent on it being their profile. Like I can't just go to Facebook generally and then scrape it and have it be similar to whatever. But there are things that are like social media-esque, like Reddit, where it's like forum posts, and if they say like which subreddit they read, so we that stuff is included. But yeah, so like the art doesn't, I mean, it doesn't differentiate a lot of things. It doesn't differentiate between like how you encountered this author, whether you read them or not, whether you read it as like an ebook versus a print book or whatever. And it's not asking about people that are, you know, authors of forums or blogs or articles that are only online. Yeah.
Right, thank you.
Great question. So I like using the author recognition test, partly because I'm interested in this construct of language experience, and this seems to capture an aspect of language experience, and language experience as a construct figures in a lot of different theories and whatnot. So print exposure is one facet, as I just said. It's pretty convenient as a measure of print exposure, but dun dun dun. One is, it seems like it's something that needs to be updated a lot. Like it seems very contingent on like generation and culture and all this sort of stuff. And so you can't just like keep using the same version for so long and then have it still be effective for like the same age range that you want to keep using. Also, does it, so sort of on the cultural question, like does it measure print exposure equally well across different demographic groups that we might be interested in? So like men and women, or Black people and white people, etc. And then also just like what is the best way to implement the task? So now we've talked about two different implementations. One is like a piece of paper with all of them together, and you're like hunting for the ones that you recognize versus looking at them one at a time. It's possible that those maybe like, you know, are kind of different tasks, like maybe license different strategies, things like that. So I was kind of curious about that. So everything I've said so far is an introduction to stuff I've been doing in my lab for the past couple of years. So basically in reverse order, I've been trying to address these things. So I'll just kind of talk quick and maybe skip some things so that I can ask you more questions. So starting with how to implement the task. So this one, of all the questions, this is the one that's closest to being like addressed. I don't want to say solved, but it's like, I feel pretty okay about this one. I wanted to figure out whether it was okay of me as a first-year grad student just be like, I can just present the names one at a time, and that's the same as presenting them all at once. I wanted to check that like, oh, is that actually the same task or not? And also at the time that I was thinking about this was a few years ago, where I was like, I want to be doing more things that can be done on the internet versus bringing people into the lab. So I do want to make sure I can figure out a way that works that's online, whether it's one at a time or not. And so what I did is I took the Acheson et al., the 2008 update, so that's 130 names total, half foils, half real authors. Their scores are just how many hits they get minus how many false alarms. I put things into Qualtrics survey website, and then I recruited people from Mechanical Turk. This was like 2020, I think, / 2021. I randomly assigned people to one of two formats, either all at once or one at a time. And then I asked some demographic stuff. So it kind of looked like this to do the all at once version. So I have a bunch of names, and all the names have check boxes by them. And so you just look at the names and check the box that's by an author that you recognize. This is what I figured is most analogous to having a piece of paper and circling the names that you know. Versus in the one at a time version. So they got similar instructions. And then, okay, this is what it looks like from my end, but from their end, they just, because this has all this like timing information. From their end, they just saw a name of an author. And then if they think it's an author, they click author. If they don't, they just leave it and then they click next. Okay. So I wanted to figure out sort of how they compare.
And they were not able to go back, I assume.
They were not able to go back.
Okay.
Excellent question.
Good.
So is it just as good, these two different formats? So I can look at things like split half reliability, try to figure out or guess which one is more valid based on kind of, are there just differences, overall differences in performance? That would make me think like, oh, maybe one of them is measuring something a little bit different than the other one. I'm also curious about whether one of them just people hate it more than the other one. So is there one where people are going to quit more often? Yes.
Each participant participated in two different scenarios, or
But
just
everybody did one of the two.
okay.
Yeah. So this was a between subject situation. So someone would join the study, and then the computer would decide which of the two formats they got, and they just did it once. Okay, so some things that happened. Let's see. Okay, one whoopsie that I did. So I collected 200 completed attempts, but a whoopsie that I did is that I forgot to tell Qualtrics to present the two conditions equally. I just kind of figured it knew that. So they're unbalanced. But I did find that, so this 200 doesn't include people that quit. There were an additional 25 people that quit partway through. But there was no difference between conditions in who quit. This is a pie chart because I thought it'd be funny to show a pie chart. This is just this same information, but as percentages. Okay. So one of them took longer. So going through them one at a time took longer. That's not too surprising, I don't think. So the one at a time took like more than twice as long. So actually I was surprised that there weren't way more quitters in that condition. In terms of how people did, okay, so this is how people, I converted everything to like percentage out of how many real authors there were. So this is Stanovich and West, how well people did. Acheson et al., how well people did. Paper I did with the one at a time. And then in just now, in the all at once condition versus the one at a time condition. Okay, so you can, I didn't put bars on it because this was a quick graph, but you can bask in how people are doing. Not great, but not way worse than anything. But you can already start to see that there's a difference between all at once and one at a time. We will come back to this. So one thing I was concerned about is not just the overall difference in the score, which involves hits and false alarms, but I also wanted to look at it broken apart by hits and false alarms. So what I'm showing here, okay, is how many false alarms people are getting, and the most you can have is 65. That would be you've selected every single foil, okay? And then this is the number of hits you can have, which again is 65 if you selected every author, okay? And then the colors are orange for one at a time, blue for all at once. What are these people doing? So like, so there's some people who just selected everything. These people are all in the one at a time condition, okay? The people that tend to have lower false alarms are the all at once people. Okay, so they're looking at they're scrolling through this list. They're not going to just like click a bunch of foils. Okay, but these other people have to like look at one thing at a time and then make a decision of like, should I click this one? I don't know, you know. Okay, so one thing I noticed, it looks like participants in the all at once condition completed the task faster and with fewer false alarms. Is it because all the names are on the same page? Or could it be about like the names needing to be individually evaluated, which is a little bit different. So then I did a second study that was very annoying. So for them, not for me, it was fine for me. So in the all at once condition, they're all on the same page, but also I'm going to make you respond to each of them. Okay, so now you have to respond to everything, whether you're in the all at once or the one at a time. And so in the one at a time version, it's similar, but now it's required that you click something. So it's slightly different than I did it before. So they have to pick either author or don't know and then continue. Versus in the all at once version, it's extremely hard to see, but there's a name of an author. It's required that you select author or don't know for each one, but they are all on the same page. Okay. So, and this was not in Qualtrics. This was an undergrad helped me do this with JavaScript using this thing called cognition.run for running online studies with JavaScript. And then I used this special library. Anyway, it was great. And then I used Prolific rather than Mechanical Turk, slightly better data quality. Okay, so everybody's evaluating each name. So that's the main difference, is that you have to do that in the all at once condition as well as the one at a time. Oh, this isn't true anymore. Well, it's kind of true. Okay, the point is I have a lot of participants and I have some stuff. So in study 1, this is now I'm showing this as hits and false alarms and all at once versus one at a time. So now it's clearer to see that people are doing better. They're having more hits in the one at a time. But they're also having more false alarms. But there's a lot of variability that you can remember from that scatter plot. There are like a few people who are just like going wild, clicking a lot of false alarms. Okay, so then what happens in study 2, where I make everybody look at each individual name and give me a response. Bam, 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 bam. So now the two conditions are not different. So this is hits, this is false alarm. Still a lot of variability in how much people are false alarming. But now the two conditions are not different. When I put all of the data together and I have which study it is as a predictor, there's indeed, when we're looking at hits, there's this study 1 or 2 by condition interaction. So it looks like we changed something important. So from the format studies, it seems like requiring responses for each item might seem to increase hits and false alarms. And that presentation format, whether it's all at once or one at a time, is not the thing that matters as much once you control for making everybody make a response to everything. Yes.
I think in your previous study for one at a time case, you had just one option, for example, either it's an author. And for narrative case, you just clicked next button, and the buttons were quite far apart.
Yes.
I think that's bigger issue than, in my opinion. Because like, are they get paid as well?
They do get paid a little bit.
Okay,
Yep.
but then like it's a bit bothersome to move my mouse from the next button to
yes. Yes.
bottom. I thought in the newer version, it's practically the same. You just have 2 buttons and then continue at the bottom. So people might as well just do the task rather than just clicking next.
Yes, that's a great point. So in the original one, right, it's like you have this big cost for moving from your next button to being like, oh, I found an author, and you have to like go and say author.
Yeah,
okay?
and if they're just random people on the web, they're not really invested in your study.
Yeah. So I think that is
Wasn't that the case though with the really high false alarm rate? Or am I
They-
mixed up?
so
The one at a time where there's just the no response required?
one at a time where there's no, yeah, people still did false alarm a lot.
Yeah.
But
So
like-
when you have the response required, the false alarm actually is like lower overall for the one you've done condition?
I'm actually not 100% sure, like if I just looked at this compared to this. Oh wait, sorry, false alarms.
Yeah.
This compared to
So
this.
false alarm means that they click author.
Yeah.
They click author for
Yeah.
something that's not an author. Yeah.
So I think what you're saying is the opposite of what this data has.
Overall, I'm surprised that people in the one at a time false alarm a lot. But yeah, I think it is also surprising that when they're not required to, it's more surprising that when they're not required to make a response, it does look like, mm, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
People are weird, man.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that was about format.
Ariel, could I ask a quick
Oh.
question?
Yes, sorry, I meant to pause because this was a pause moment. Yes, Brooke.
Yeah. Did I see correctly that in one of the conditions, one of the presentation conditions, the answer that wasn't author was don't know, and then the
Yes.
other condition was do not recognize.
Oh, hold on. So let me look at the. Yes, and I'm not sure if that survived. So yeah, this says don't know, and this says do not recognize. Huh. I have to check if that's what it looked like when we collected data or not, versus just when I made these pictures. But I'm curious about your suspicions about how those are different, because those are different questions.
Yeah, I don't have any particular I was just curious. I thought maybe you had a reason for putting
No.
the. Okay.
No, I think it's,
no, I don't have a hypothesis of which way that would push the data.
yeah.
I do have another observation, perhaps. So this is
Yeah.
kind of a semantic memory recognition, right? So it's basically familiarity,
Yeah.
I assume, right? And so when you have them all on one page, you can compare relative familiarity in a way that you can't one at a time. And even I'm not sure if the data support this idea, but I would think that that would make the task a little bit easier for, and therefore more accurate for one at a time. Although it's kind of not what your data show. But I'm just wondering about that familiarity element in recognition memory.
Yeah, like my suspicion going in was that if you can see all of them together, there's a couple things that could be happening strategically. One is, yeah, like the things that are most familiar might kind of pop out relative to the ones that are less familiar. And you could maybe say that I'm only going to pick the things that really seem familiar compared to the other ones, maybe.
Yep.
And that also you can see how many total there are. And so maybe some people might be guessing about like the proportion of authors versus not authors and being like, it's probably supposed to be 50-50. So that's another thing someone might do versus when you're doing them one at a time. I don't tell them how many items there are. So they're discovering as they go. And also as they go, they're discovering like kind of how difficult the things are. So yeah, I think, oh, what were you gonna say?
I was kind of curious as whether it matters to you whether there's a familiarity, a remember know difference in these judgments, whether they're based on familiarity or recollection, or if that kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah, I don't know. Like and this will get into like the how should the task work, like what author should be on there and that kind of thing. Is that like what is really being measured exactly? And I mean, I think, what do I think? I don't know what I think, I guess, about whether it's a remember, like I can recall like seeing this person's name on the cover of a book versus just like I feel like this is an author. I haven't really thought about it, like which of those is like a better reflection of. I mean, it seems like that like the best reflection of whether they've experienced it is something that's like I can recall like seeing this and I know that I've seen this. But I don't know. I feel like if you're familiar, you could be familiar for a reason that means that you read it. But
Yeah.
and also you know that you've seen it you could also know that you've seen it and that you haven't read it. You know, that it's like a book on someone else's desk or something.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
yeah, I don't know.
Another way to get at this would be kind of a confidence rating.
Yeah, yep.
I was trying to get squeeze as much information about
Mhm,
this binary choice as
mhm,
possible in terms
mhm.
of how well they recognize these authors' names.
Yeah,
Because
and that's
probably
actually,
variability in the yeses, in the people who the hits, they're
yes,
probably, yeah. And so any way to squeeze out, to get, to capture that variability, it seems might be helpful.
yeah, for sure. Thank you. And that's so there's a paper I'm about to mention that's Peter Gordon, the one that's at Chapel Hill. He and a student, actually an undergrad, I think. Yeah, Moore and Gordon, 2015. They also did some author recognition, like item analysis stuff, and they ended up recommending, among other things, that we should take confidence ratings. I think for similar reasons. Yep.
Oh, sorry, this is kind of a different question.
That's
Sorry,
okay.
I thoughts, I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah.
Did you collect any other data from these prolific participants, like to do kind of those correlational analyses that you were looking at earlier? You do?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh no, did I remember to make a slide about it? Nuts. Okay, but what happened was, so I also collected a survey measure of reading habits, and okay, it kind of looked like, so if you correlated people's scores on comparative reading habits and people's scores on the author recognition test, it kind of looked like there were some people where this is what it looked like based on the cloud of data. It kind of looked like there were two clouds where there were some people who like weren't doing great on the author recognition test, and there was a huge range of how high they were rating themselves on the survey measure. And then there were people for whom there seemed to be a relatively close correlation between how they were doing on the art versus the survey. Now, you could interpret it as like, oh, people on the survey measure are maybe like, overly confident or something, but also they might be reading a bunch of other things than the things I'm asking them about. So, yes, other questions. Yes.
I mean, as a researcher, I read quite a few papers every day.
Yeah.
But I've never recognized any of those names.
Yeah. Yep.
So-
Yeah. So that's another part of the like, what is this task exactly? Because it's not print exposure generally. It's a pretty particular kind of print exposure. And so it leaves out all kinds of reading that people do that is not reading book authors.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
quite domain specific. So,
Yeah, like, so there's some variability. Like, I think actually in the Mary Ellen MacDonald one, I think maybe everyone's a fiction author. There's another update that's like, there's a fiction author list and a nonfiction author list. But like, even there, it's like, you're not going to capture all of the things that people read. Yes.
And it also makes me think about format, because when you read an ebook now, the author's name isn't predominantly displayed on the cover.
Mm,
And when you read predominantly print, you're
Mm.
seeing that name every time you go to read the book.
mhm,
And so there's just like more exposure to names and physical books
Mhm.
than there are with digital
Yes.
books.
Times,
Yeah.
you flip in and then multiple times, even in the first two
Yeah.
pages, yeah.
Yep, this is another important, potentially important difference that I have not tested in any formal way, but it seems important. Yes.
So along the lines of the confidence ratings maybe, but, I find myself going like, okay, I may know this author, but was it now James or John, whatever? Smith? So, another study or way to tease it out could be, you could just either change one letter or the first name from a common or not. Maybe you already tested that out.
No, but that
Those are
just
very
seems,
unique names. Some names are very
diabolical.
similar to a very common Smith or Jones.
yeah.
And the other thing that occurred to me, confidence rating, but related, if you did a verbal protocol study and ask people as they're deciding, is this da-da-da, or maybe was that a different first name? Sort of have them talk about their process and see how close they might get or what confuses them. You might get some insights into the strategies that way.
Yeah, I do want to know more about, how people are making
Yeah, the
the
verbal
decisions.
protocols can give you lots of insights.
Yeah, I've never done anything like
It's
that.
a lot of data, but it
Yeah.
can be very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I could scare up some more undergrads to listen to
There you
people
go.
talking. Yep.
I have maybe an odd question, but I'm curious about your thoughts for like, just fundamentally, right? The author recognition task versus like, why not an author free recall task or something like that?
mhm.
Like, I mean, obviously that's a much harder thing to do to like just pull up author names, but is that something that is like, has anybody looked at that, or is there some other problem with that?
Well, I mean, I'll start by saying like everything has problems.
Right.
So probably there is a problem,
Yeah.
but is it like a worse problem than these problems? Probably not.
Okay.
But I don't know of just like name a bunch of authors. Like you have however many minutes, like write down all the names
Right,
of
right.
authors. I mean I'm trying to think of anything that's similar to, I mean, so I think that would be fun. I think even if it weren't as a measure in itself, I feel like it could be helpful for developing a recognition measure
Sure,
of just like who are the authors that people know off the
Yeah.
top of their head and using that as a way to find items.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that would be useful. And of course, there's going to be authors that people write down that are maybe like not quite exactly correct, you know?
Right, right.
So we have to
misremember it,
yeah, so we have to look kind of
Back
like
to, right,
Yeah,
close
yeah.
John versus
yeah.
James.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
horrible at spelling, so like, I wouldn't.
Oh,
I wouldn't
that's
be
true,
able to
especially
spell.
name spelling.
Yeah.
yep,
For sure.
yep. Another question is like, authors versus titles. Titles would get tricky because I guess there's probably like you could just make up a title and it's probably a book.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think probably
Probably.
authors, but there's like a I thought of it because there's a kid version, like children's books, that's a recognition task, but it's like it's about titles versus asking kids about the authors of the books that they're reading. That's a tangent. I forgot your original question. Recognition versus recall.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I think that's a good
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the thought being too just that like, obviously then you don't have these issues of selecting a specific set of authors that everybody needs to
Mm-hmm.
work with, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's a lot of other messy models.
I'd be a little bit worried about scoring. I'm not worried. I'd be curious and confused about scoring because I'm worried that like just a lot of people would recall the same general number of things that like that maybe they're just like, well, the number of things I feel like thinking about is like this many, this seems good. And
Right.
people all end up writing like 10 things. Then it's like, oh, do I then like give them a special score if they write down like obscure authors versus popular authors that they probably do know, but they just didn't write down. It's
Right.
so that's not to say that that's a problem, but just that like that's an interesting detail to consider. I don't know who's first.
Oh, go ahead.
So one other thing I thought of, I don't know how often people either, or it comes up in text, but to use corpora to get at popularity or
Yes.
commonness of names.
Yeah.
And then there's also that what is it, that engram where you can just put a name in and see how popular it was at a certain time. Who offers it? It's one of the software companies, where you can just track how common words are.
Yeah.
Yeah, Google engrams, right?
Yeah.
That could be another way to see just what they eat. I mean, because they do a little bit of that sifting for you, what's out there
Right.
commonly from data. I don't even know where they get their data, but I think they sift through lots of texts, and so that could be a measure of popularity to find names.
That is also an idea that the Moore and Gordon people, when they did their item analyses, they're like, oh, in the future, like you could use that kind of data, and they actually kind of looked at that for kind of trying to rank the authors by how much they're mentioned. Yeah, so that's a really super good idea.
Yeah, I was just slightly similar to Andreas. So I thought, what if we can just show a triplet of author name, title, and the most kind of highlighted passage from the book to help them recall whether they right?
Mm.
Why don't we just get fixated on the author? If you just care about the language experience, then it's just bringing most highlighted passage of the book along with the title and the author. So three of those information can help participants to recall their experience. Because you can get highlighted messages from like ebooks or whatever.
So kind of stacking some more cues together to
Yeah,
be like,
I mean, I may have not remembered the author name, but I have read the book and I may recall that fact from the title or the passage.
I mean, the famous example, "'Twas Nice Before Christmas." I mean, everybody recognizes it, but somewhere on the spectrum between totally random and very recognizable text and/or protagonists. People know a lot of the Harry Potter protagonists, so you could jog memory that way.
We have a question.
Oh, yeah.
Andrew, go
ahead. Thinking about how the author recognition task has been used, it is a proxy. I mean, what's been useful about it is that it correlates with so much other stuff and was relatively easy to administer. So it felt like a quick way to get a gauge about a lot of issues with your reading population. It was a quick way of sensing who had a lot of experience with print or not. So I guess my question for you is, yeah, I agree with you that the recognition task needs to be updated, because what was useful in '89 is not going to be all that helpful in 2024. But the value of the measure was the fact that it correlated with all these other measures. That seemed to me, or at least when I used it, that was the payoff. Get a quick way to get information that would also give you information about all this other stuff. So that's what I understood to be the value. So any revision of it would be useful insofar as all those correlations remain the same. And to me, that's the kind of $64,000 question. If you revise it, can you make sure that you keep all that? Will it still serve as a proxy the way it always has? And it feels as if the way that it would be possible using norming studies to get a much more carefully controlled list of authors, like using something like Prolific or Mechanical Turk, to give people many author names and many filler names, and just see who is highly recognized, who is not recognized at all. And then you, as the experimenter, would get to decide where the cutoff would be for the ones that you want to include or not, in terms of I'll say recognizability, but as the previous discussion indicated, knowability might be a better term, and also be able to control better by norming the filler names, what names look like author names, what names don't look like author names. And then once a more rigorous norming has been done, being able to use that and see if the correlatability that made the author recognition task useful still holds.
Yep. Wait, was there a question? Like, I feel like, yes, those are good. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so the question is actually to turn back the question that you started with, which is what are you hoping to get out of this detailed investigation of the author recognition task in terms of the wider usability of this instrument?
Yep. So yeah, I mean, I think, as you say, it's useful if it's a pretty good proxy for print exposure and that it works well as a non-redundant but highly related measure of language experience with other things that seem to be good measures of language experience. And so I want to try to increase the validity so that it seems, that it seems like it's a better measure for what we want to use it for now and the way that people read now, so that hopefully that would only serve to sort of increase the reliability and the correlation with other related measures and things like that. But yeah, that would definitely be like the key criterion, is that it's still a useful thing in the context of what we want to use it for, not just that it's a good measure in itself, I guess. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, I guess I'll quickly say a couple things about stuff related to updating items. This will be really quick, but so asking about how well it works for different subpopulations. So this is a question that measurement people answer with a type of analysis called diff analysis, or differential item functioning analyses. Does anybody have experience with this kind of analysis? Anyone in Zoom land? Rats. I'm looking for a friend who knows more about this than I do. Because I've done it before, like in grad school, and that was a while ago. And so I'm not like super confident about how to do it the best way. There's like packages, and I know that I'm like using the package right, but there's like nuances that I need to talk to a person about. Any hoodle. But the logic of a differential item functioning analysis is to look at individual items and try to figure out whether, if you take two different people who are each from a different subpopulation and you assume that they have the same underlying ability, are they equally likely to answer this item correctly? If not, it seems like maybe that item has a bias, basically. And so the analysis involves splitting your data into subpopulations, trying to use their data on all the other items to try to estimate underlying ability, and then looking at, according to different levels of underlying ability, how is that subpopulation doing on that particular item. So when I did the analysis on the data I have, my results turned up 25 authors that had significant diff by gender. So I was able to split the data by, you can compare men to not men, which were women and non-binary people. And then there's one item. I'm not super confident about the race analyses because it was like almost all white people. And I'm pretty sure that there's a power concern there. Statistical power, I mean. Not like, okay, anyway. So I'm just gonna quickly show you this list of, so these are some authors that showed significant diff. This is just overall kind of the difficulty of the item, so the proportion of people overall who got it correct. And then the diff, if it's, so this is in like log odds of like who's going to get this correct. If it's above 1, then it's against men. So like women are more likely, women and non-binary people are more likely to get it right. Versus if it's under 1, then it's toward men. Just looking at the authors, like I feel like just sort of at face value, it's not clear why there would be diff for these particular ones.
Well, I'm curious, the authors here seem like they'd be curriculum authors.
Great question / comment.
Yeah.
So I had meant to get back to the issue of curriculum authors. What counts as a curriculum author now, I'm pretty sure is different than in 1989. And I'm using the items from the 2008 update, where I don't think they like made an attempt to avoid curriculum authors. And so I think there are a lot of things that are in the curriculum now, or are likely to be in like some curricula now, that were not considered curriculum things before. So that's sort of like I think a moving target, and also like a, is that a distinction that we still want to make, I guess? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move on from this slide just so that I can, because I think we're kind of done now, right? But also because I just want to real quick tell you about the other things. So about items. So I already talked about this paper, but here's the slide about it. They looked at some items from the same version of the art that I'm using. They wanted to include a bigger number of easy author items that right now it seems to more differentiate between people who know the difficult ones versus not, but it's harder to tell people apart at the lower range. So they figure you should include more popular authors. It needs to be updated. Right now, it works best for people who are older because it's based on sort of like older authors, and that they recommend using corpus frequency as a tool for estimating difficulty, as Andrea said. I forgot that I have this slide that is impossible to read. Oh my goodness. This is all the authors and how much people got them right. And then this is all the foils and how much people false alarm to them. So we have that data just from like people's actual answering. And then in terms of gathering new, as in new to the list authors. So my lab and I have just been like, who are authors? And so we've looked at a bunch of different lists of like, who are the authors? And so then we have a list of like 200 something people who are, collected from these sources and are not currently on any versions of the author recognition test. And then we have to figure out, okay, like, are there ones that we should exclude? So there are people who write books that are, I just have a feeling Plato shouldn't be on here, but I can't articulate why. Dr. Seuss is like, I don't know, it's like he writes for children primarily, but like, I don't know, like trying to make a children's author, non-children's author distinction is kind of messy. People who are like famous for stuff aside from being an author, but they also are an author. So trying to figure out figure out rules for who's a good candidate, and then like doing a bunch of norming and testing with what do people actually think. But I think also gathering information from people's just recall of like who are authors could be useful. We're also thinking about, for some of these like people who write books but are not thought of as like book writers, like they're thought of as like philosophers or political type people. We could also just ask people to look at a name and tell us what they're famous for and see if they are most likely to say they're famous for writing. I don't know. So that's all the things I wanted to say. And I'm going to stop now. Thank you for your comments and questions, and I'm happy to have more comments and questions as you see fit.
Thank you very much. That's great. Very fun.
Yay.
It might also be worth like reaching out to public libraries and asking for their circulation statistics, because they keep track of that, and it's generally, it's anonymized and everything. So I know, especially with the New York Times bestsellers, those are people who can afford to buy books.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
And so there's probably a bias in that. There's bias in everything. But yeah, I think librarians like to be helpful, and they would probably be honored if you reached out and asked for their circulation data.
That is a great suggestion. We got as far as just trying to look if anybody publishes their circulation data. We found a list of kind of like the top things from the New York Public Library system. And then we're like, we should ask librarians, and then we felt shy. But I think I just need to find an undergrad who's less shy than me and is good at calling people on the phone, and then we're in business, baby.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Counterpiece to ebooks for that too?
Oh,
Since
sure,
they're
right.
not going through libraries necessarily, right?
Some of them are. You can
Some of
check
them
out
are, right?
ebooks. Yeah.
Like Libby and
Right.
But there might be lots more.
Yeah.
Don't.
Kindle.
Right. Yeah.
I wonder too, so for your, just back to this question of like the correlational data from your recent studies and stuff, wondering like, so you have the diff analysis for like, what was it, just gender and race, right? One question is, are the correlations different across those populations? I don't know if that's part of the analysis that's been done yet or
It's not like technically part of the diff analysis in the way that I understand it, where you're bringing in
right
data
right,
from
right.
other tests. But I think that is another way of asking the like the logic is the same of like,
Yeah.
you know, these should be strongly related, and if they're less strongly related for this subpopulation, it indicates there's like
Right,
something
and we're
off.
like missing some
Right.
like the authors or something like that that they have been reading.
Mhm.
And my other question is just like, how much other demographic data do y'all plan on looking into? Like, you could do things with like age, or I don't know if you have data on like if people are like bilingual, or you know, a bunch of I'm not creative enough to come up with enough different like experiences that
Me neither, but those are the two that we thought of too.
okay, yeah.
So we did ask people their age and a variety of questions about their like English experience versus other language experience. And I mean, I've looked at the just the straight up correlation with age. Older
Yeah.
people tend to do better on this version of the author recognition test. But I haven't done like a subpopulation analysis or any more diff
I'm just really
analyses.
curious
Yeah.
to see if there are some populations for which this is a better or worse
Right.
predictor.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And even like socioeconomic stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. So one of the goals for me is like when I collected this data, I was like vaguely aware that I would want to do a diff analysis, but I didn't collect data in a way that's optimized for that analysis, meaning that like I'm making sure I'm like kind of oversampling from like a minoritized group of people so that I would have enough people in these different groups to compare. So if you just like collect the data as it is, which is what I did, it's like there's a couple of Black people and there's like a couple, you know, and I didn't measure, I measured education level, like highest level of education, but not other SES things. So I think when I do my next kind of big batch, I want to try to measure a couple more things and also try to like sample in a way that lets me have more power to do this analysis.
Right,
Yeah.
About the what you had mentioned about the demographics in the sample.
Yep.
That makes sense. That would be good to do.
Yep.
Yeah, because some of the subcultures are more oral rather than written, you know, there's that difference, so.
Sure. Yeah, there
Yeah.
could be just group differences in how
Yeah.
people are
Right.
engaging with
How they
language and
communicate, yeah.
text and all that. Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Yep.
Lots to study.
Yeah. Lots.
It's great stuff, though.
Thank you.
Yeah, really
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yay. So we're all excited about measurement. Yay. All right, cool.
All right, cool.
Thanks, Zoom land. I see. Wait, hold on. Should I be looking at the chat? Cool stuff. Thanks. Oh, yay. Yay. Thanks.